Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really glad you're here. If you enjoy fun content and cool videos, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Let's jump right in.
Working as the night auditor at popular hotel chain, I was fortunate enough to meet many interesting people. It seemed as though the insomniacs who would leave their rooms at night looking for some company were always the most interesting of people. In my time there, I learned that everyone has a story to tell, and this one in particular I can never forget. Asterisk, there was an older woman, most likely in her late 60s. She was a retired nurse at the psychiatric institution downtown. Each night she was at the hotel, she would come down to talk to me at the same time, 3:25 a.m. I was always grateful to see her, not only for the amazing stories she had to share, but also it was around that time when I was struggling to stay awake the most. Most nights she would tell me stories about her children or grandchildren, and occasionally she would tell me about past work experiences. Some of her patients were still at the institution, so she was required by law to leave out any identifying details. Asterisk, one night, when she had come down, she appeared to be disturbed by something. At this point I have been talking to her for about a month. As her house had flooded and she was placed in our hotel until the repairs could be made, I asked her, "What's wrong?" She hesitated, dazing off into the distance for a few seconds. I could tell she was being haunted by whatever happened to her that day. She eventually came to, then turned to me and said, "Let me tell you about an old patient of mine." I replied, "Sure thing," and then made us a fresh pot of coffee. It was a common practice of ours to move to the lobby couches where it was much more comfortable. We would stay up together, drinking coffee until it was time for me to get breakfast ready for the other guests. And then she would head back up to her room to try and get some rest. Asterisk. There was a man who was transferred to my ward shortly after I started working there. Most days he was a very polite, and you couldn't even tell that there was something wrong. We each took a sip of our coffee, and she continued, "That man passed away last week." I offered her my condolences. Then she added, when I said most days, there were times where he would have these fits of uncontrollable rage. He would spout while kicking and screaming, seemingly nonsensical phrases, and we would have to restrain and issue sedatives to calm him down. She had never told me anything like this before, and I was intrigued to say the very least. Then she said, "Today, while I was at the store, I heard his voice from behind me saying the usual nonsense. Black car, oak tree, yellow jacket. When I turned around, I only caught a glimpse of him in the corner of my eye before he disappeared." Asterisk, I thought nothing of it and continued shopping. When I finished and began loading the groceries in my car, a man wearing a yellow jacket driving a black Camaro stopped next to me and asked where the nearest gas station was. Remembering my former patient's words from before, I was spooked a little bit, but brushed it off as coincidence. I gave the man his directions and he went on his way. Several minutes later, I had finished loading the groceries into my vehicle and started back to the hotel. Traffic was horrendous the entire way. As I was inching my way down the street, I saw police zoom past me. Shortly after, fire truck and ambulance. As I approached the source of the traffic jam, I was horrified. The man from earlier appeared to have lost control of his vehicle and crashed into a tree. An oak tree, to be exact. I remember not really knowing what to think about what she told me. I muttered, maybe it was all just a coincidence. She smirked, sensing my empathy before finally agreeing, perhaps. Before we knew it, the alarm I had set for myself to get breakfast ready had sounded. She then took her coffee and headed back to her room for the night. A day or two went by and she appeared to have accepted the events that took place as coincidence and moved on with her life. That was until the following Friday, the last time I would speak to her before my work week was through. When she came down, she had the same horrified look on her face. We sat down, got coffee, and began to converse as we usually did. She was quick to tell me I was in my room watching TV this morning when I swore I heard his voice again. The voice screamed in the same frantic, delusional tone that he once did in the ward. FedEx 6, cold day sack. I then sprung from my bed, searched my entire room, and found nothing. As I went to turn off the TV, I saw a glimpse of the man on the patio. I started towards the door leading outside, and before I got to it, he was gone. Asterisk at this point, I was just as startled as she was, because I knew what she was going to say next. As I was eating my dinner and watching the news, I saw a story of a shooting in Houston. It was a FedEx employee seeking revenge on his ex-wife. This man managed to execute 6 of her family in his pursuit, but was caught before he could find out where she was. The news showed the man's vehicle surrounded by police in a neighborhood cul-de-sac. I had seen this story earlier that night on the lobby TV, as I would spend most of the night watching the news to pass the time. I didn't know what to say. I sat there waiting for her to speak again, and she just went up to her room early that night. I was concerned for her well-being because at this point I saw her as a mother figure to me. Asterisk after my shift was over. I spent most of the weekend trying to figure out what was going on with that poor woman. I remember thinking, is she just senile? Surely she is just making this up. Despite thinking this, I had not known her to tell a lie. She was always so genuine when we spoke. I looked forward to returning to work to see how she was. Come Monday, she didn't come down like she usually did. I checked our guest list to see if she was still checked in, and sure enough, she was. Assuming she needed space, and understandably so, I let her be. She didn't come down again until that Thursday when she had yet another encounter with the man who haunted her. This time she didn't tell me what she has seen or heard. She just tried to make small talk and forget what was going on in her life. I was worried for her, but I respected her want for privacy, and I carried on with the meaningless banter that night. Before she went back up to her room, I told her, I'm worried about you, you know. I'm always here if you need to talk. She turned to me with a half smile and said, I know you are, and thank you for listening. Asterisk the next day when I came in for work. The previous front desk clerk had informed me that the guest in room 406 had checked out earlier that day. I was shocked. I couldn't understand why she would leave without telling me. Her insurance company had booked her for another 3 weeks. I thought, where would she go? That night, as I was walking the halls to keep active so I wouldn't doze off, I noticed a piece of paper on the floor by the elevators. I picked it up to throw it away when I noticed it had the woman's handwriting on it. The sloppy nature of the note led me to believe that it was written in a hurry. This concerned me, as I started to fear for her safety. The note read, Iron Horse, Clear Water, Field of Flowers. I thought it was strange that she had taken the time to write this down, and that whatever these words meant caused enough panic in her to make her want to leave. Asterisk several weeks had passed, and the strange happenings involving the old woman had all but left my mind. That was until I went on a family outing with my daughter downtown. On our way to the park, we passed by the mental institution. I never noticed the horse statue that sat in the lobby before. It was at that moment I remembered the note I found that night. I spent the rest of the day looking for something that could have coincided with the words on the note, but I found nothing. The next day, I drove to that institution and took a look around for myself. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon an empty room with a painting on the door. Depicted in this painting was a beautiful field of white flowers at sunset. I asked the nurse who used to be in this room, and she said it had been empty for a couple of months now. She said that the last person to have occupied that room was a delusional schizophrenic who passed away. Now the room is used for storage. I then asked if it was okay if I took a look inside. She obliged and I walked in. Asterisk, the only thing left in the room were some old boxes, labeled decorations and furniture that had all been stacked neatly against the wall. As I walked closer, I noticed there had been something scratched into the wood paneling behind one of the boxes. From the looks of it, this carving must have been there for years. It read, "One day you will discover the truth." This was quite different from the phrases I was used to hearing from the old woman, but I assumed it had to be from the same man she had spoken of. Strangely, I felt this message was meant for me. I couldn't explain it. Feeling dissatisfied with what I had discovered and not getting any closure on the issue, I returned to my apartment. The complex in which I resided overlooked a small lake, and I would frequently take walks there to gather my thoughts. That evening I did just that, and I was the only one there. As I was overlooking the clear waters, it hit me. I was where I was supposed to be for the final words of the note I found. This made me feel uneasy, and I decided to return home. That's when I heard a crazed man's voice. I used to work for a marketing firm located in the Back Bay section of Boston. It was a small company, but large enough that we operated on an entire floor of the building we rented, and that I was not familiar with everyone else who worked there. I started in 2007 as part of their web-based media team. For those of you who don't know anything about the marketing business, it's very client-driven. A team of producers sell our services to companies, often a little overzealously, and the designers and developers typically have to work like slaves to meet the producers' promises. This can mean late nights, taking a cab home because the commuter rail has shut down. It also means coming in on weekends and working late then too. It was November of 2008. And we had a big promotional site being developed for a rather important client. I'm not at liberty to give out the details surrounding the project, but it's not relevant to this story anyway. What's relevant is that the client was pushy, as most are, and the site was complex. So I ended up having to come in on a Saturday and work late into the evening to have something ready to present by Monday. If you've ever worked in an office on the weekend, you know just how different and isolated it can feel. There were other people at first, ambitious or merely driven, doing their thing, but never our paths did cross. The office was organized in patches of cubicles. We developers tend to be a little off-kilter, goofy, prone to coming in wearing t-shirts and faded jeans. The higher-ups put us in the back corner so that tours with potential clients could avoid having to explain us and our appearance to them. The corner just happened to be facing the alleyway between our building and the next one. The back row of cubicles eventually got replaced with an aesthetically pleasing row of glassed-in offices for the director of the web-based media team and some selected subordinates. But at the time of this tale, there was only her dark office and a row of grungy cubicles where said subordinates vied for legroom with piping and windows looking out at the brick facade of the adjoining structure. The lighting in our section was often dim. My co-workers liked to loosen any fluorescence that flickered rather than request a change of bulb. My own cubicle was on the far side of the area from the beautiful brick vista, smack dab in a corner with a set of shelves. I only warranted half the space of a regular cubicle because I was the newest member of the team. Seated at my computer, a radiator warming my toes and my back to the rest of the office. I worked on the site. It was a little after midday when the producer called me to check on the status of the project. The nice producers came in and stuck around to show their support when you had to come in on weekends. Sometimes they'd go pick up lunch or dinner to reduce your downtime. The not-so-nice ones called and encouraged you while they went shopping or played golf. Things were going well, and I told her as much. While she began droning on about a list of features I should remember to have implemented, I heard a noise behind me. It sounded like chains rattling, which I thought was an unusual sound for someone to be making. Which is why I got up after finishing the conversation and hanging up and went into the kitchen area to investigate. The kitchen separated our section from the graphic designer group and was at the end of a large open hall that had several meeting rooms, attached before ending on the other side at the lobby with the front desk, an elevator. There was an old freight elevator right by the kitchen side of the hall, but we usually avoided using it because of its tendency to break down. There was nobody in the kitchen, but as I turned to look down the hall toward the front desk, I saw the door to the freight elevator coming to a close. At the same moment it closed completely, I spotted a coworker heading for the lobby elevator. They turned at the sound of the freight elevator door shutting, saw me, and waved. "Don't forget to turn on the security alarm before you leave," he said. "Am I the last one here?" I asked. He nodded and headed for the elevator. When I got back to my desk, the phone was off the hook. I chalked it up at the time to me being forgetful, but I wonder now if it was something else. The line was making that EHN noise you hear when you've left it off the hook for too long. So I hung it up and went back to work. It got dark out and I still wasn't done. So I called my wife to tell her I would be working late and to go ahead and eat without me. As I hung up the phone, I heard a creaking sound, like door hinges. I was feeling a little creeped out by being all alone. So I got up and went back to the kitchen area to see if someone had come in. If they had, and I left before them, I wouldn't want to activate the alarm. Between the cubicles and the kitchen is a very tight hallway, which is where the restrooms are found. As I passed it, I saw the men's room door coming to a close, like I had just missed someone going in. I waited in that spot for about 5 minutes, trying to look nonchalant about standing around, like I was trying to do something instead of just watching to see the person come back out. Finally, feeling increasingly anxious, I walked down the dark hall and slowly opened the men's room door with the planned excuse of what the hell. I had to go, and this is a bathroom. The bathroom wasn't just empty, it was pitch black. The lights had been out since I came in that morning, and nobody had turned them on. Walking into pitch black unexpectedly like that can really put you in a state, let me tell you. Suddenly being blind when you were able to see just a moment ago. It was like the air got sucked out of me. HHHHUUUPPP. And I realized I was holding my breath because everything was dead. Silent, and my ears had sensitized in the hope of catching even the slightest sound. I stood there a second and then turned on my heel and got out of the restroom back into the hallway, where I clutched the wall like I was afraid it was going to fall away and leave me back in that infinite blackness. I wasn't even thinking about whether anyone else was watching me at that point. I couldn't tell you why I was scared at the time, I just was. I did not like being alone in that office. I knew that right outside was a brightly lit city, but somehow it all seemed really far away. The T station was a block away. I could run to it and be home in a couple hours. But then I'd have to explain to the producer that I wasn't done the site because I got scared. And she was sure to tell everyone else, and I'd be laughed out of the office. I flipped the light switch to the restroom there in the hall and went back in. The men's room was about the size of 2 of our cubicles, and even grungier than the alley back behind the office. There were 2 stalls, a pair of urinals, and a trio of sinks with a wall-length mirror. I hated the urinals because one was right by the door and I felt like people passing by could see in while I went. The other was made for a midget. Even though I was alone, I went and sat down in the stall. I also just felt the need to sit and relax a moment. I was just beginning to relax when I heard the door creak again, followed by footsteps on the tiles. I was relieved by the sound because it meant I wasn't alone. Someone else had come in, and all that sudden fear was just me being irrational. I cleared my throat, a tradition I do sort of to say this stall is occupied. The moment I made the sound, the footsteps stopped. I suddenly felt a little anxious again. I cleared my throat a little less obviously, to make it seem less like an introduction and more like I just had a bit of congestion. The footsteps suddenly began to get closer. When it sounded like they were right outside my stall, they came to a stop. I got real tense and leaned down to look at the person's shoes. There weren't any at that moment. I got goosebumps on my arms and my heart rose up into my throat. My stomach was doing cartwheels, but I went about the routine of finishing up, flushing and opening the stall door. The room was empty. I went over to the sink and began washing my hands, constantly looking over my shoulder and around the room in the mirror. I went to the hand dryer and started it up and was rubbing my hands together when I heard another sound right behind me. I could see in the reflective chrome of the dryer nozzle. The other stall door was shut where before it had been wide open. At that point, I didn't care whether my hands were wet or not. I wiped them on my pants and turned for the door out of that room. The whole space felt smaller, more confined, and as I walked past the stalls, I heard the click of the lock and the stall door started swinging open as if to greet me. I didn't look in. I didn't want to see even if there was somebody there. I just ran the last few feet, yanked the door open as hard as I could, and bolted down the dark hall back to the safety of my computer. When I got back to the desk, my phone was off the hook again. I could hear someone speaking even before I picked it up. I put it to my ear and listened. At the tone, it will be 7:43. I held the phone there, listening for the mentioned tone. I turned and watched the hallway I had just come from, though from my desk I couldn't see down it. There were no other sounds except the hiss of the radiator and the computer fan. The recorded voice played again, but this time it was different. It sounded like one of those old cassette tape players when you only held the play button halfway down. It was deeper and slower, and I did not feel any comfort in it anymore. At the tone, it will be 7:43. I hung up. At that point, I decided that I did not want to be there anymore, and I didn't care if I got laughed at later for it. I grabbed my satchel and saved my work. Just as I told Windows to shut down, the phone rang. Instinctively, I picked it up, figuring it was the producer calling. I'd just tell her I'd come in tomorrow and finish it. That's what I'd do. At the tone, it will be 7:45, said the voice. I hung up and pulled the cord out. The phone at the desk next to mine rang. I ignored it and grabbed my shit to get the fuck out of there. I decided as I walked that my best course of action was to go into the kitchen, walk the long hallway to the front desk, and wait for the elevator. Then I remembered that I had to set the alarm. The alarm pad was past the elevator, around a corner, back by the executive offices. Not a big problem, I thought. As I walked past the dark hall toward the kitchen, I looked down it just to make myself feel better. The door to the men's room was wide open, worse. It was pitch black inside again, but I realized as I stopped and looked that I had never turned it off. The linchpin in my horror came when the door suddenly began to slowly shut, as if it had been waiting for me as an audience before doing so. I turned away and went into the kitchen, trying not to think about the fact that the men's room was just on the other side of the wall from the hallway I was about to go down. I looked down the hall at the front desk and the elevator out of there, and it never seemed so far away before. I took a step, and from behind came another sound that sent shivers down my spine. The crash bar on the fire escape being pushed. I turned 180. The fire escape was located right next to the director's office, and was just about 2 rows of cubicles away from the kitchen area. As I watched, the door to the fire stairs down the back of the building swung slowly open into darkness. I turned back toward the hall and ran. The sound of a ding indicated the arrival of the freight elevator, and as I passed it, its doors slowly began to open, just like the stall door in the bathroom. I heard the sound of rattling chains from inside, but I did not look. I was running for that front desk, running for the elevator down to the lobby. When I got there, I slammed into the wall between the elevator doors and punched at the down button desperately. I turned back to look where I came from. Every time I do, I think of Lot's wife in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. You never fucking look back. Ever. The back area of the office was bathed in blackness. I could not see it at all. There was some light coming into the kitchen from the developer area, but even as I stood there watching, it seemed to fade and become dark. I looked at the elevator floor indicator and prayed that the approaching car was brightly illuminated. 2, 3, 4. The ding of its arrival was beautiful. The doors opened to a well-lit salvation. I scrambled into the elevator and frantically hammered at the ground floor button. As the doors slowly started closing, I watched the encroaching darkness seem to swallow the office. When the car reached the ground floor, I was squashed down into the corner, terrified that it would, at any moment, fill the compartment and eat me. I bolted through the lobby and out onto the street, where I promptly threw up, grossing out a passing cyclist who yelled words of encouragement as he continued down the street. I did not return to the office the next day. I told the producer I had gotten violently sick, and she talked the client into extending the deadline. I got chastised for forgetting to set the alarm, but no harm was done. 3 months later, they reorganized the back area of the office, built the subordinates' offices, tore down a wall between our section and the kitchen, and set the cubicles up in a more standard format, moving me from my little corner by the dark hallway. I never went down that hallway again. In the remaining year that I was there, if I had to go, I walked down to the front desk and took the elevator down a floor where there was a public access restroom, much bigger, much cleaner, much brighter, and far less haunted. I fell asleep at work a week ago. Usually, this isn't a big deal. I work at a biolab, and the job has a lot of downtime. I was currently tasked with a thermo experiment dealing with a new strain of the IAV virus, common flu, and was attempting to study how temperature changes in the environment relate to population growth of the virus. I say new strain, but really, it's the seasonal virus. I'm a virologist, but the complex I work at relates to biosearch of all different kinds of organisms. As an independent research firm, we are often given tasks by a third party and are awarded based on our findings. Often the tasks I'm given follow a similar structure. I receive a viral culture, build the culture to a certain sample size, then present environmental challenges to said culture and discover how it reacts, and what kind of proteins are present in the surviving population. It sounds boring. It isn't. I absolutely love my job. Well, I used to at least. I put my 2 weeks in today. I was relaxing in my office when one of my co-workers, Mary, knocked on my door. She was brand new to the job, but her warm smile was already infectious. "I brought you some coffee," she said, walking in just past the brink of the door. I turned around from my computer, giving her a faint grin as I took the coffee from her hand. "What are you working on?" "Temperature resistance of a new strain of IAV," I said. "Sounds sick," she said, winking. I admittedly gave a quick laugh, shaking my head. The culture I treated yesterday was displaying some very interesting properties. The ones that survived the heating process seemed to have a different genome from the others. I've been tracking this evolutionary process, of course, but it's almost as if the virus is undergoing a radical divergent evolution. The ones that survived are developing a new protein coat, and their RNA is already showing significant adjustments compared to the parent batch. "That sounds exciting," she said. "Want to help?" I saw the light fade from her eyes and she turned down at the floor. "I actually just received a package I've been looking forward to this morning." "Is that so?" "It's from a biopreservation company working in the Amazon. They sent a sample up that they want me to look at." She paused, and I could see the words forming in her mind before she said anything. "But if you find anything cool, or just want to stop by, I'm next door." "You'll be the first person I see if I find anything," I assured her. We both traded a smile, and she started towards the door. I turned back to the culture I was currently studying, feeling her eyes on me one last time before she left. The door closed behind me, and I could feel my heart beat heavily. I sighed. This was to be a routine day. I headed to the lab, sanitized, and got into my haz suit. The chill room had 4 different cultures in it, the parent culture and the 3 subcultures, who were experiencing different temperature controls. 2 of the cultures were transported into a heating container, and I set the incubator to 2 hours. I made a mental note, split the parent culture into a new culture, and introduced a bacterial food supply for the viruses. With that done, I headed back to my office, turned the lights off, and slipped away. 15 minutes, I told myself. It ended up being nearly 2 hours. I woke up with a lump in my throat, the kind that was a warning of what kind of week I was looking forward to. "Shit," I said with a hoarse voice, standing up from my chair. I rubbed my throat, feeling the itchiness fester. I grabbed a cough drop from my pocket, swallowed it with a cold sip of water, and sat back down. "Shit," I repeated. "Now, you should understand that quite contrary to public opinion, viral containment breaks happen somewhat often. Our lab doesn't deal with viruses that are highly dangerous. In fact, we are only equipped to deal with low-risk viruses, and as such, our containment protocols don't need to be extensive. In the case of a small outbreak, the protocol is to sanitize, report, sanitize again, quarantine, and finally, sanitize." I got into my haz suit and quickly returned to the lab, frantically pulling the cultures I was working on out and inspecting their cases. The freezer's sensors hadn't detected a leak, and the cultures had a population that lined up with their estimates. I did the same with the incubator, and again, no sign of a problem. I sighed a breath of relief. I extracted a small RNA sample from the culture. I could feel the cough drop working, but it wasn't long before the itchiness continued again, quickly, but ensuring no more possible containment breaches would occur. I sealed the culture, emailed myself the transcript of the RNA strand, and sanitized everything I touched for the day until there was nothing to sanitize. Then I sanitized everything again. At this point, there really wasn't much I could do. I told my supervisor that I was coming down with something. He wished me good luck and told me to quarantine myself until symptoms resolved themselves, and if possible, procure a culture from phlegm or any other bodily ejections. I thought of the strand I had just been studying as I drove home, the one with the bizarre genome, the one with the new protein coat. I had seen it before, but that was the funny thing about viruses. No matter how often you've seen a pattern emerge, they can still surprise you. The itchiness in my throat propagated. I made soup that night, watched one of my favorite shows, and retreated to my bed. I stripped down and wrapped myself in a blanket as I began to feel the itchiness turn into a painful heat. I had developed a sore throat. It was supposed to be easy the next morning. I woke with a crippling choke. The soreness had spread along my esophagus, and I could feel a sharp pain in my abdomen. I downed an Advil and spent the remainder of the day in bed, watching thin, dark lines of shadow reflect off the backside of my overhead fan. By the next day, I could feel a strict fever and my hands were soaked with sweat. My vision was getting blurry and my head pounded with the drum of a furious disease. I moved to the kitchen, my hands wobbling as I grabbed a bowl and small bag of cereal. The flakes missed the bowl, and I sat looking at the mess I made on the table, my shivering hand clanking the spoon against the table. I was famished, but I did not want to eat. I had never experienced a flu like this. Was I patient zero of a potentially disastrous disease? Of course not. Viruses did not mutate like that. I had been working with the common flu. Sure, there were always variations in their genome, but the virus I had been studying was still mostly the same IAV virus I had worked with for years. I knew this RNA strand, but still, the deviations I saw, ... The pain in my abdomen was unbearable by the next day. I could barely open my eyes as sweat drained down my face. I was a wreck, and my body ached from every inch of nerve fiber. I stood, looking at the bright light with weak eyes, quickly retreating to my bed before a migraine could set in. So I laid in bed, continuing to fight with an invisible intruder. I tossed and turned and contorted and writhed, the pain in my stomach intensifying into a maddening crescendo. I told myself the next morning I might die. The pain was so severe. My fever was flaring. My throat was intensely on fire and my abdomen was screaming. I was starving but knew no food would go down. I was thirsty but I couldn't drink. The illness only waned slightly in the evening, when the quiet hours of evening were interrupted by a surprising phone call. "Hello," I said, feeling the tightness in my head as the fever intensified. "Are you okay?" a soft voice said from the other side. I'm fine." I swung my legs over the side of my bed, the room spinning as I slowly let the walls reorient themselves. "I heard you came down with something, but I haven't heard from you." She paused, and I could feel nervousness turn to courage as she asked something I hadn't expected. "Do you want me to come over, maybe make you something?" It was Mary. For this brief moment, my symptoms waned. I didn't feel anything but a slight warmth in my heart, and I was emboldened so badly to say yes, no. I coughed, laying my hand over my mouth. My hand was warm, and I pulled it back to reveal a piece of dark phlegm. My eyes lightened up in discomfort as I had realized I coughed up blood. I don't want you catching ... whatever. I have. She paused, and I could sense the worry in her voice when she broke the silence. Did you get contaminated? I shook my head, the floor beginning to dizzy. I grabbed the crusted towel by my side, slinging it on my shoulder as I moved to the bathroom door slowly. I work with a flu virus. It's not serious. I want you to get better, she said. I slammed myself against the counter, looking shakily into the mirror. Yellow eyes looked back at me, and my skin was pale. My lips looked dry red, as if I had been brought up from the dead. I'll be okay, I quivered. She sighed, and for a minute we stood silently on opposite ends of the phone. I was holding back violent coughs as I could hear her ease into a new conversation. Is it okay if I asked you a question? Go ahead, I said, my head throbbing. I could feel something in my stomach, the pain in my abdomen growing in intensity as I turned my face to the sink. Something wanted to come up. I turned the faucet on, dipping the washcloth in the frigid water. Were you in my office on Monday? I shakily turned the water off, gripping the edge of the sink as my legs began to weaken. No. W.I.? I asked with a fragile voice. Well, one of the specimens I received from the Amazon went missing, and I was trying to see if maybe you knew where it went. SPS. I looked into the mirror. I looked half dead already. The feeling in my stomach was beginning to lurch. I was about to give in. It was a never-before-discovered species. A spider. My eyes bulged as something in my throat popped. I didn't have time. I dropped the phone as my hands grabbed the sink and I lurched into the bowl. I opened my mouth and a wave of fluid immediately left my throat. Vomit flooded out of my mouth and into the sink, and after what felt like an hour, I pulled myself up, wiping the edges of my mouth quickly with uncooperative hands. Hello. My eyes went down to the mess I had made. I could feel my tired heart accelerate violently as I took in what was in front of me. The fluid in front of me was alive. The sink bowl was bloody, the bottom lined with small chunks of flesh from this mess. I could see movement. Hundreds of tiny, hairy legs scurried around in my sink. I could feel my stomach not as I watched. They were bright red, their tiny legs scrapping what I had given up, their small mouths feeding off what I had now stained the sink with. I had thrown up a colony of spiders, and then I felt the legs in my throat, felt the movement in my stomach. I screamed, but this only invited another round, this time more fierce as a dark liquid came out, bringing along another wave of crawlers. There were unhatched eggs in this one, but many more that were struggling against the bloody barrage that painted my bathroom counter. I slipped back, falling against the floor, wiping my mouth as more arachnids emerged from my mouth. My voice was dry, and my scream turned into a petrified cry as I could feel warm blood drip down my chin into my bare chest. 100 fleeing spiders crawled away into the dark recesses of my home, out of the window and down the drains. I brought my legs to my chest, swatting at whatever walked past me, my body lurching and violently shaking as a third wave tried to surface. I could feel my bowels contort and twist as I kept my mouth shut, a flurry of tiny feet scurrying past my lips. Tears scoured down my face as I spat into the toilet, the drops from my eyes wishing the nightmare away. I awoke the next morning in a bloody bathroom. The sink was covered in dry, dark red chunks. The toilet bowl was the color of dusk. The tile was littered with trail marks of red and the slain bodies of tiny spiders. The unhatched eggs that had emerged were still in good condition. I destroyed them with my boot. Beyond me, the room was devoid of life. I stood, my strength returning, and I turned on the shower as I quietly sobbed, my aching body destroyed as I wept against the wall. I recovered over the course of that day. I ate, I sanitized, I drank, sanitized again, and I spent the next 5 hours resanitizing everything I touched. I didn't say anything to anyone. I had the flu. That was my story. Then it dawned on me. I had released hundreds of these into the wild. They had hid and retreated, and there were countless now out on the prowl for their next victims. Victims who were asleep, like I was. Victims who didn't know they existed. Victims who might wake up with a sore throat and call it a cold. Victims who would carry on with their lives until they find themselves giving birth to 100 spiders in front of a mirror. I had done nothing to try and contain this, so I put my 2 weeks in. I'm not a virologist. A virologist would have tried to stop them from entering the world. I was too weak, too horrified. As a result, I have caused an outbreak of a new parasitic species. Mary was devastated when I told her I quit. I told her I couldn't explain my decision. I didn't want to burden her with the knowledge of what she did to me. I wished her well on her research. She told me she'd keep in touch, but I wasn't sure I would uphold my end. I drove home thinking about what had happened. I knew I needed to tell others, so I made this post. I packed my things and will be moving to a colder climate. And to this, I can only give a strict warning. If you see a blood-red spider crawling in your house, kill it immediately. If you show symptoms of a flu-like disease, get tested. Make sure it really is viral. And if you ever find yourself in the situation I did, where you become the breeding ground of one of these abominations, plug your nose, aim for the toilet, and just get it over with as fast as you can. It's easier that way. I hope they don't infest the same person twice. I work at a large retail store with dozens of departments and thousands of guests a day. I was counting people at the door the first day I saw her, admittedly more engrossed in my phone than getting an exact head count. For the 10th time that shift, a child protested leaving the store, unhappy with whatever consolation price their parents had given them. In this particular scenario, a grandmother was trying to explain to a little girl that they had to eat their ice cream outside, due to the governor's ban on sit-down restaurants, and would meet back up with everyone else when they were done. I only glanced up because I thought the explanation was comically adult for such a small child. Her grandmother grabbed her hand and led her out the doors, reminding the girl how good the ice cream would be. The kid, though, seemed more preoccupied with the concept that her mother was being left out of the excitement. It was adorable. "Mummy's upstairs," she screamed as the pair left my line of vision. I heard one last complaint from the tiny voice as they passed into the sea of consumers. "My mummy is upstairs." My blood felt like ice water coursing through my body, while my mind struggled to comprehend the weight of that one little word. So unfamiliar, so non-familial. The parking lot was bustling and noisy. Car horns blaring and hurried families chatting, but vacant of the only subjects I wanted to see. My shift ended shortly after, but I remained in the parking lot for hours with a stolen walkie tuned into our store's emergency channel. but the channel remained silent, and the fleet of police vehicles I was dreading never arrived. I checked every news channel and community Facebook page on repeat, refreshed my tab on missingkids.org every 15 minutes. No frantic posts or breaking stories, and certainly no Amber Alert. When all was still calm in the morning, I returned to work at least partially convinced that I had turned that snippet of familial conversation into a sinister story entirely in my head. But just to be certain, I discreetly polled my co-workers to ensure that I hadn't missed anything during my parking lot stakeout. If something did happen, I certainly had handled it very incompetently. And if something didn't happen, there was no reason to broadcast my inept response around the store. So I casually asked how the rest of last night was, or if I had missed anything crazy. A couple of times, natural conversations allowed me ask if we had ever had a lost child that we didn't find, or when the last time we had one was at all. My exhaustive research provided not one tiny sliver of supporting evidence. I felt better. I felt a lot better 2 days later, when I happened to be helping out downstairs in the checkouts, just beyond my current patron's mountain of teased hair. I recognized the violet and white-trimmed parka of the same little girl. I had spent hours trying to remember every detail I could reach about both the girl and her grandma, and I could identify that jacket with extreme confidence. I was elated when realized when I didn't see that same woman accompanying her, a fact that I decided must indicate that she was, in fact, reunited with her family. As I watched from behind my terminal, though I noticed that I didn't see any person at all was clearly accompanying her. But she seemed calm and happy, waiting patiently in line at the ice cream counter. It made sense, I figured, that her parents were likely several feet away in the customer service line, undoubtedly returning whatever they had purchased on their first trip. By the time my line was cleared, Violet Coat Kid had already gotten her sweet treat and probably some store credit. But I was satisfied with seeing her alive and unharmed. The next time I saw Violet was less than 24 hours later, and my reaction was a deep pang of embarrassment. Our customer service is fucking terrible. I was halfway up the escalator when I saw her in the crowd below. I made a mental note to send an email out to the sales team. This was not acceptable. The fourth time, I looked in a mirror to adjust my mask, just in time for her to blend right into the herd of shoppers. The fifth time, while a man screamed in my face, I caught a quick glimpse of her face for a brief second before the elevator doors closed to take her upstairs. On time 6, I was administering very basic first aid to a hypochondriac with a paper cut, and while I had no choice but to apply pressure to the wound, I saw Violet run gleefully behind some display curtains. Actually, seeing Vi didn't unsettle me until our 7th encounter. I had made a couple jokes around work about the renegade kid with the purple coat, but I got the feeling that the only laughs I got were from those co-workers so immune to not getting jokes that they just laugh on instinct. I got more point blank with a couple of friends. But no, they hadn't noticed Vi at all. But why would they? We clean up after like 1,100 kids a day. But the 7th time was different. I will admit up front that I was already nervous that night. I was charged with hanging a banner from the ceiling to promote tomorrow's big sale, and heights, especially precarious heights, were never my thing. But I fucking did it. I got up there, I sat on the do not sit here ledge like a man, and put that shit up. While I was up there, though, I saw V peek out of a wardrobe, and the shock sent me all the way to the ground. When I returned to work after my hospital visit, I tried my best to explain what happened. I felt like a chump, too scared to climb a little ladder, and I needed them to know why I got scared. But it was obvious, right? A fricking little kid pops out of a closet after close. Who wouldn't jump? I was waiting to hear that V was John's daughter, or Jeremy's stepkid, or the love child of Jason and whoever was taking their lunches in his backseat last year. But nothing. No one claimed her, no one saw her, just nothing. I lamented my decision to even ask. I didn't learn a damn thing. And now I have a write-up for having a ladder out while there were still customers in the store. I kept seeing my V. Not every day I worked, but on a regular basis. She was always content, always playful, always relaxed, but always alone and always out of my grasp. I began to toy with all sorts of explanations, but my mental health seemed like the most likely culprit. You know, because it's real. But today changed everything. Today, I saw my little V running a couple of flights beneath me down the winding and rarely used employee fire staircase. Knowing full well that I was likely crazy, but yet having the privacy to test it, I screamed for her to stop. She did. She froze. She looked afraid, and it obvious that she did not want me to move any closer. Imagining what she could have already endured, and also being alone in a dark stairwell with someone else's kid, I stayed perfectly still. This was my chance to get her back to her parents, ensure her safely, and reaffirm my sanity. Finally, as calmly as I could muster, I asked my little V, "Do you know where your family is?" She answered simply and without inflection. "Yes," she stated. "We knew where my mummy was." "3 years ago, I was looking at the local job classifieds online when one of the ads caught my eye. Not because of what it said, but because it said so little. Best I remember, the ad just read job available. Good pay, no benefits. Discretion required. It then listed an email address, and that was all. At the time, I was managing a music store, but I had already started hearing rumors we would be shutting down within the next year, and the likelihood of a transfer to another store was slim. I had been morosely looking at job listings for the last few days, but this was the first one that stood out, if only because I was bored and it was weird. So I sent an email. Half an hour later, I had a response, telling me to go to a particular office building in an upscale part of the city at a precise time for my screening. I went, and after waiting for a few minutes in the lobby, I was taken into an office where I was given a series of forms and questionnaires to fill out. They collected them and told me they would be in touch. I had almost forgotten about the whole thing until a month later I got a call saying I had moved on to the second stage of the hiring process. I was again given an address and time, and when I arrived this time, it was a different nice office park 20 miles away from the first one. I was met by a man who introduced himself as Mr. Solomon. He escorted me into a large room that contained a chair and a desk. On the desk were 2 large monitors, a keyboard and a mouse, and a bolted-down metal box with 2 oversized buttons on it, one red and one green. He told me this room was a model for the place I would be working if I took the job. He described the job as follows. I would be working 7 shifts of 6 hours every week. My job would be simple. I would arrive at work 10 minutes early and enter an outer area that was like a locker room. I would have my own personal locker. I would store all belongings in the locker and change into the provided work clothes. I was never, under any circumstances, to carry any item of my own into the surveillance room. I was never, under any circumstances, to take any item with me from the surveillance room. As for what I was to do in the surveillance room, I was told that the monitor on the left would constantly show a live stream from a high-definition camera in a remote location. My job was simply to watch the camera. Once an hour, I would get onto the computer attached to the right monitor and enter a brief log, describing anything interesting that occurred in the last hour. I would have no pens or pencils or paper, and I should never try to take any kind of written notes about the work. As for the red and green buttons, the red button was only to be used if there was an emergency. This meant something on the video or in my workspace that required outside help. The green button was to be hit if I saw something on the video feed that was particularly noteworthy. It would tell other people somewhere that, at least in my opinion, something interesting was going on. Solomon stressed that while I was given discretion on when to use this button, I should err on the side of only using it if and when something of real significance occurred. He pointed out the camera on the ceiling of the room we were in. He said the real room would be the same. My work would be observed, and other people were watching the room on the video feed as well. He said I was only a redundancy in case other systems failed. He then smirked and asked if I knew what he meant by redundancy. I nodded, trying not to show my irritation. I don't talk that good to people, so sometimes they think I'm dumb. That's okay. Let him think that if he paid me good enough, the pay was very good. $35 an hour. This worried me. I was already thinking this was some kind of psych experiment or secret government job, which I was okay with. But that kind of money to sit and watch a screen. My mum always told me that if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. And this was seeming too good to be true. I asked if I was going to be doing anything illegal. Solomon laughed and said no. I asked if anyone was going to get hurt. Again, he shook his head, no. He said the reason they were paying so much was because they needed employees that were motivated to be professional and discreet. The work they were doing was important, and for various reasons it couldn't be discussed. If I took the job, I would have to sign papers promising I would never discuss my work there, or I could be sued or locked up. I'm only breaking that now because of everything that's happened. So I took the job, and because they wanted me to start right away, I had to quit the store with no notice. I felt bad about that, but I was excited about the new job too. It was a lot of money and seemed like easy enough work, if a bit boring. I was nervous that there was something more to it, but I told myself I would just have to see. No point in chickening out and wasting a good chance because I let my imagination go crazy. I was given the location of the job itself, and when I went there, I was amazed that it really was just like the model room I had been shown, with only a few differences. There was a locker room you had to pass through to enter the surveillance room, and there was a small bathroom attached to the real surveillance room also. The real room had a small water cooler in the corner, but because I wasn't allowed to bring anything in with me, I had to eat before or after every shift. The biggest difference, of course, was that the monitors were turned on. The right monitor was just a black and white terminal like you see in movies sometimes. I could type in my logs, but no internet to look at or anything like that. The left monitor, it was video from a room. You would call it a bedroom, I guess, because it had a bed in it, but it had lots of other stuff too. A TV, a sofa and chairs, a couple of tables, and plenty of empty space in between. The camera must be high up in a corner, because I could see pretty much everything except for the far sides of furniture. At first, though, I didn't notice any of that stuff. All I saw was her. She looked to be a little older than me and was very pretty. When I first saw her, she was laying on her side on the sofa. That was the part of the room farthest from the camera, but the picture was very clear and I could tell that she was sleeping. I found myself leaning into the monitor more so I could see her better. And then I thought about what I was doing and felt embarrassed. It's like I was spying on her. A peeping Tom, my mum used to call it. I didn't want to be a peeping Tom, but I didn't want to be silly either. I needed to think about it slow. It was a good job, and I wasn't doing anything wrong, right? I wasn't hurting anybody. The woman looked fine, and the room was nice. She probably agreed to be there, and it's all some experiment or something. I was just overreacting. So I sat down in the chair and began my work. It didn't take long before I understood more. The woman I took to calling her Rachel wasn't there of her free will. I never saw her hurt, but it was clear that she never left that room except to go into what I think is a bathroom area that my camera couldn't see. Well, she never left the room on her own. Periodically, usually a couple of times a week during my shifts, men and women in strange-looking outfits would come in and take her from the room. Sometimes she would struggle, but usually she would just go along with her head hung low. They would always bring her back, though the times when she wasn't brought back during my shift were always the worst for me. I would worry about her until I got to work the next day and saw her in the room watching TV or painting. She never looked hurt or even that upset except for when they took her, and even when she fought, they were always gentle with her. Still, I knew something was wrong. I considered quitting the job or hitting the red button and getting someone to come so I could get some answers, or calling the police and showing them what the camera was showing me. Except I was scared. Scared of losing my job, and scared of what these people might do to me if I quit or told on them. Solomon had told me when I took the job that part of being discreet was not asking questions. I would never be asked to do more than I had already been told, but I could never tell anyone what I did or saw, and I could never ask questions about what I was doing or why. So I made excuses. It was all an experiment. She was crazy or sick, and they were trying to help her. She was doing a job just like I was. Or if she really was a prisoner somewhere, at least I was watching to make sure that she was okay. If they ever tried to hurt her, or I saw that she really didn't want to be there for sure, I could get help then. In a way, I told myself, I was helping to protect her by watching. I don't expect you to think much of my excuses. I don't think much of them myself, especially now. But in my defense, when things changed, I didn't ignore it or try to explain it away. I knew something had to be done. Rachel would usually paint for an hour or two every day, and it seemed to always be during my afternoon shifts. The room had no windows as far as I could tell, but I guess she either used a clock or her own body's time to keep to a kind of schedule. I always liked to watch her paint. The thing she was painting was always facing the wrong way for me to see it, but I could see her face as she worked. She always looked peaceful and happy when she was painting, and seeing her that way, smiling serenely from time to time as she got something the way she wanted it, always made my day. I first noticed something was wrong when she started painting more frequently a few weeks ago. Her expression was more focused and serious, and there was a tension to her movements that I wasn't used to seeing. At first I thought she was just really trying to work hard on something, and I wanted to tell her not to worry. Every few weeks, the others would come in and take the old paintings out anyway, bringing in a new stack of, I think the word is canvas, but it was more than her being focused. Something was wrong. She didn't look happy, and she was going for hours at a time. In the span of 3 days, She had finished 4 paintings. I had been growing more and more worried watching her work, and when she finished the 4th, I found myself telling her to just stop and rest a while. I had grown accustomed to talking to the monitor, talking to her in my own way, but she didn't stop. Instead, she began moving the paintings, arranging them on the back and seat of the long sofa at the far end of the room. This was the first time I had gotten to see any of the paintings. Even when the others were taking them out, they always seemed to be turned away from the camera. I was still worried about her, but I was also happy to finally see something she had worked on. Happy and amazed. They were beautiful. One was a beautiful green forest. Another was an old stone well. A third was a house sitting alone on a small island. The last was an old-fashioned looking movie theater. All of them looked like something out of a dream, with trailing lines of color mixing in the air around them like leaves caught in a wind. It was only when I looked close that I realized the lines of color weren't random. They were words, easy to miss if you weren't looking close, and by themselves, they didn't seem to mean much. Just the ghost of a word somewhere in each of the paintings. Easy to lose in everything else that was being shown. I leaned into the monitor and squinted, trying to read the words. Then my heart started thudding as I made them out. Blinking and rubbing my eyes, I looked again, reading them out loud in order, left to right, top pair, then bottom. Please, help me, Thomas. I pushed back from the monitor, my hand over my mouth. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how any of this could be happening. It wasn't just that she was asking for help, though that was a big part of it.